My connection went all over the world, tracing family members.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, the real important message in that, I mean, it's nice to have a building full of old relics that everybody can come and have a look at, but the connection to the extended family around the world that has now like an 80-year history.
Yes.
Since 1945 and before. Some First World War, some Korean, some, like the connection to all these people around the world. It's invaluable.
Yes.
To understand, I guess, the need to, in the words of the founder of this museum, it is not about glorifying war. It's about the sacrifice and the compassion and the circumstances and the families of and the human aspects of war and the after effects.
Yes.
So I guess we're recording. So my name is Tim Darnbrook and this is Georgina Speaks. And I'm here with Sid Giddings, who is the president or curator of the Georgina Military Museum. And it's actually quite an honor to be here, and he's got a story to tell. And so we're here to record it, and I'll just leave it to you, okay, Sid?
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you for this opportunity, Tim, to tell one of our stories that we have here, which are very meaningful. This story has a local connection. It's about a Halifax bomber, a 4-engine bomber, number HR 805. This bomber had a life with 2 squadrons, and it was damaged, went to factory repair and came back. It was given a new crew, and this is the story of the last flight of that crew. They lasted 2 missions, which was pretty normal for a green crew. The green crews suffered a very high loss rate until they became experienced. The local connection is with I believe it was a Major Waterson from the Salvation Army. It's about him and his son, who was a bomb aimer. And the story begins back about 4 or 5 years ago. I went to DC Marine on baseline near the police station, and they had a scrapbook which said "found on their premises," an old scrapbook, and it was of a bomber crew, HR 805. And they said, maybe you can find a home for this book. So I said, well, we can certainly display it in our museum, but I will look for an owner. So it took me 2 years of on and off digging into this. And with the help of an Oakville local newspaper, I found a nephew of the bomb aimer on HR 805. And we presented this scrapbook to him on one of our military days. Now, this scrapbook was a whole load of memories of Mr. Waterson, Major Waterson's son, Irwin Waterson. Irwin Waterson went off to the Air Force in England and become part of the crew of HR 805. The father, in this scrapbook, there was unopened letters that had come back that he had sent to his son, that after his demise was sent back. Many things were sent back to him, unopened letters. This is a list of personal effects that came back of Irwin Waterson's. But there was unopened letters. All these letters were in the scrapbook, unopened. There was letters back to the Air Ministry trying to find out what happened to the plane. And there was all kinds of communications, and it was a story in itself. There was also a letter from a prisoner of war camp in Germany from a sole survivor on the plane. And he wrote to Mr. Waterson and gave him a very, very crude outline of maybe what happened, and he couldn't elaborate, obviously, through secrecy. And after the war, he was debriefed, and he made letters up and sent to every one of the crew members, which were in Britain, Canada, and elsewhere. So each family member got a letter from the sole survivor to explain where they were, what happened, and how they got shot down. And what I'm about to read to you are some of the letters that were sent to Mr. Waterson from an officer called Pilot Officer Murray. Mr. Murray had sent a letter to Mr. Waterson explaining who he was, and he had just been released from prisoner of war camp, and giving a very, very sort of careful outline of what happened to the plane and the crew. He was being very diplomatic. I saw a copy of the letter that he sent back to the survivor, and he said, please, I need to know exactly what happened to that crew and my son. So the letter was written back telling Mr. Waterson what happened to the crew and his son. And what I'm about to read to you, there are two letters. All these letters are from Warrant Officer Murray. And what I will show now is the picture of 5 crew members. This one here is Mr. Waterson. The gentleman in the middle, Davenport, he was the pilot. He came from Windsor. Sergeant Hill, he was the tail gunner. There are 2 other members of that crew that weren't in this photograph, and one being Sergeant Murray. The final and 7th member we don't have a picture of, unfortunately, and he was the member of the crew. He had 53 flights under his belt, and he went down on that mission, which is it's a terrible shame for all of them, but for a man to survive 53 bombing missions, and he went down. So this letter I'm about to read, there are 2, and this one is dated the 4th of the 9th of 1945, after the war. I'll have to put my glasses on. This starts off, says, Dear Mr. Waterson, many thanks for your letter of August the 3rd, which I received last week. Naturally, I am most anxious to answer all of your questions. I am glad that Mr. Davenport in Manchester sent you on my information in Windsor. However, now that I have your address, I can supply you with more details of what happened on the night of 19th, 20th of February, 1944. I'm afraid my letters from Germany were out of necessity void of these details. First of all, I propose to tell you simply that the story of our last flight, and then I shall answer the questions you sent in your letter. Then I shall answer all your questions you sent in your letter. Sorry. You will understand, of course, that things happen so quickly that my comprehension at the time of the events was limited. But as time went by, I was able to piece together the broad outlines of what had happened. We took off from our station at Melbourne, East Yorkshire, set our course for our target, which was Leipzig. On reaching the enemy coastline, defenses were encountered, the usual enemy flak, which didn't bother us much. Soon we had to take evasive action to avoid the searchlights, which were getting uncomfortably close. This went on for some time, until we were completely coned by the searchlights. And from then onwards, we were unable to get clear of the cone. The flak became very accurate, and soon fighters were attacking also. For a while, good piloting and excellent evasive orders by the rear gunner enabled us to carry on, until a fighter managed to get a burst of fire which must have caught us across the machine at Halifax. From the wireless operator's position to the mid-upper gunner's turret, and from then onwards I heard nothing over the intercom from the wireless operator or the mid-upper gunner or engineer. We seem now to have been in real difficulty, and Frank, the pilot, gave the order to bail out. But before I could take any action, the machine went into a terrific dive. I found it impossible to move, despite the fact that my parachute was well within reach of my hand. After diving 4,000 to 5,000 feet, the pilot, Frank Davenport, managed to pull out of the dive. How he managed it, I simply do not know. Thereupon, I put on my parachute and tried to open the front escape hatch beneath my seat. It jammed halfway, and seeing that Irvin would have need to shut it after I left, I then opened it again after crossing the other side. I shut it again myself and motioned him around to my side. Meanwhile, since I then realized we were flying perfectly straight and level, I decided to check back on Frank that the order to bail out was still in force. He was gasping a bit as he replied, "Yes, for God's sake, hurry up." Whether he was gasping because he was hit or because of the exertion of pulling the plane out of the dive, I cannot say. Irvin by this time had returned to jettison the bombs. So I opened the hatch door again and stepped across the hole with my full weight on the door, which then flattened out satisfactorily. Irvin was now standing opposite me with his parachute on, so I signaled for him to go first. However, he made it very clear that I had to go first, and seemed so adamant that I slid through the escape hatch and pulled the cord. A few seconds after I left, there was a terrific explosion. The red-hot balls of fire went whizzing past me. A fighter came right past me and dropped a flare. I'm not sure whether he hit the machine with a rocket or whether fire from our aircraft reached the petrol tanks. I floated down to earth somewhere between Bremen and Oldberg and was caught after a few minutes by German army. Because I landed in the middle of our incendiary bombs, they were busily engaging trying to extinguish them, and I was led away and had no ill treatment. Even then, I had hopes that one or two of the boys had managed to bail out, and I made extensive inquiries from the RAF men I recognized at Bremen Jail, Oldberg Jail, Duglaft, and Frankfurt on Main transit camp. They were all unavailing. You see, I could not ask the Germans if they had seen or picked up any of our crew, because acting under orders, RAF, I refused to give the number of our machine, names of any of the crew members. My number, rank, and name was the only information I was allowed to give the Germans. As time went by, my hopes for the safety of any of my comrades sank lower and lower, until I reluctantly came to the conclusion that I was the only survivor. Now I will try to answer any questions set in your letters. Now, Mr. Waterson has sent a letter asking specific questions, and I read this letter, a copy of it, of what happened to his boys and his boy and other items, which they're going to highlight right now. Near what city, over land or water? I landed somewhere between Bremen and Oldburg, so it was definitely over land. First taken to Bremen jail, aerodrome, and then Luftwaffe jail in Oldburg. Were any of the boys injured? The only member of the crew I can answer for is your son, and Irvin was uninjured up to the time I left the aircraft. I surmised that the wireless operator, Minupper gunner, and engineer was seriously hit or killed by flak or fire from the fighters. Frank, the pilot, may possibly have been hit as well. Question: do you think the plane may have crashed in water? No, I believe it just disintegrated in the air. Germans, judging by the questions I was asked, did not seem to have any trace of it either. Was the plane on fire? Much damage from flak? It was hard for me to say because being the navigator and using a light for my charts, I was completely blacked out and then isolated from the rest of the crew. There's nothing said over the intercom suggests that we were on fire or hit, but I'm inclined to believe that we were in trouble of this kind, or Frank would not have given the order to bail out. Were you attacked by fighters? Yes. Whether it was the same one constantly coming in or a few, I cannot say for certain. Time and day, 0145 to 210 hours. Any engine trouble? No. Were the boys in good spirits before? Yes, definitely. As usual, we were always happy and confident in each other's company. Did you suffer any ill treatment after capture? No, I was browbeaten a little, but stood up to it very well. Is there any possibility the boys may have gotten down and were ill-treated? To my knowledge, there was very little possibility that anyone got out. What was the last you saw when leaving the plane? As I somersaulted through the air, I saw Irving standing over the escape hatch, and then the terrific explosion and flash. Do you know if any of the others actually left the plane? No, but I doubt it. Did you see what later happened to the plane? No, but as far as I could ascertain, the machine was pretty well disintegrated in the air. Was the plane in good condition on leaving the base? Yes, it was generally accepted the best one in the squadron. And although the journey, some electrical equipment went faulty, it did not affect the airworthiness of the plane. What position did Sergeant Hepworth and Sergeant Marshall fill? Sergeant Hepworth was the mid-upper gunner. Sergeant Marshall was the engineer. What had the boys been doing during the day? From 9 a.m. onwards, we were checking that everything was okay in the aircraft, wireless, set navigation, equipment, guns, bomb sight, etc. After briefing, we had a few hours sleep, then final briefing and takeoff. Now he carries on with his letter. None of your questions, Mr. Waterson, in the least is foolish. I only hope that I have answered them all clearly and concisely. To your satisfaction, if you want further enlightenment on any point or have any questions to ask, rest assured I will make every endeavor to answer them as best of my ability. I am indeed grateful to receive your congratulations on my safe return home, and like you, I deeply regret that none of the rest of the boys survived with me. Sometimes, in more melancholy moments, I used to wish I had gone with them. We were all such great pals, and I miss them more than I care to tell. I'm enclosing some snaps and negatives, all of which I would like returned, as they are my only pictures of the boys. If you haven't got any snaps, you might be able to manage something from the ones I have enclosed. The group snap was organized by Miss Dorothy Teasdale, Sergeant Hepworth's fiance, who she added Sergeant Hepworth and Sergeant Marshall. These two are not being original in the group. Perhaps she has sent on copies to you and Mr. Davenport, but if not, I might be able to get copies from my print. You will greatly oblige me, Mr. Waterson, if you will send me on a copy of this letter, send a copy of this letter on to Mr. Davenport in Windsor, because I know that he also is most anxious to learn the details of the events of the 19th to 20th of February 1944. I am sure the information in this letter will be of great interest to him and his wife. Frank, the pilot, gave my mother a pair of gauntlets and ice shields to keep for him. I think he meant to use them for motoring when he got back to Canada. At the end of the war, you see, we were fully expected we would make it. Perhaps Mr. Davenport can let me know if he wants me to send them on to Windsor, because if he wishes so, I will please to send them. I understand from Frank's uncle in Manchester, I have visited, in brackets, I have visited the relatives of all members of the crew in Britain, that there is a possibility that Mr. Davenport will be visiting England soon. If that is so, I shall be pleased to look him up wherever he is staying, or alternatively, he can visit me at home, whichever is more suitable. Personal interviews are, to my mind, always easier and more satisfactory than information given by letter. Well, Mr. Waterson, I think I have covered all the points in which you wanted information on. I know that you will appreciate the full story. Best wishes. I'm yours sincerely, E.W. Murray. Now, there was a second communication to Mr. Waterson. The first one was typewritten. The second one is handwritten, and I will read this one out also.
Okay, sure.
Okay?
Yeah,
Shall I do that now, or?
Whatever you think is best, because we can edit later, and we can put them to the end for people who want to watch that part.
Now, this letter was dated on the 26th of 10th, 45, and it's in reply to Mr. Waterson's answer to the previous letter. Many thanks for your letter dated 29th of September, which I received last week. Also, the prints and the negatives which you enclosed arrived in good condition. I was pleased to note that you already had copies in your possession. I am glad that you appreciate my letter. Needless to say, I hardly relished the task of giving you negative news, but it was plainly my duty to give you the plain and simple story. Just before your letter arrived, I had two communications from the Canadian Casualty Branch of the Air Ministry in London. They were asking same information I gave you. They were anxious to find out any possible burial places for any of the crew. To be completely helpful, I decided to visit them in London and give them my first-hand information in person. With help of maps, I managed to give them a fair idea of where I landed and answered all questions. I agree that they have an extremely difficult task, and doubt in my mind if they will manage to find out anything specific. However, they assured me they will do anything they can find out. I will immediately communicate with you if I have any news. I was quite impressed with the manner in which they are prepared to help relatives of missing personnel. And they were very pleased that I would have paid a personal visit. Up to the moment, I have not heard from Mr. Davenport, but I expect to receive a letter in the near future. If you think that there is anything of interest to him in this letter, please pass it on. Here are the answers to the questions you asked in your letter, to your last letter. Aircraft name. The number of aircraft was HR 805, showing our squadron identification, letters AZ. We had no name for the aircraft. Approximate height, we bailed out 14,000 feet. Number of periodic flights over enemy territory. Sergeant Hepworth had done 55 flights, 53 in the Middle East. 2 over Germany, has shot down 2 enemy aircraft, and had been shot down himself in the Middle East. He had bailed out over England on some occasions. When shot down in the Middle East, he, with his crew, escaped through enemy lines and got back to our lines. Frank, the pilot, had done 4 trips over Germany, 2 as a second pilot for experience. The rest of us, it was our second trip. There were no incidents of note to report. Did Irwin and Frank know their promotion to warrant officer? I think Frank knew, Irwin knew it was due. Frank also knew he was about to be made an officer. I trust these are of interest to you. If you have any more questions you'd like me to answer, please let me know. Many thanks indeed for your kind wishes to my future in civilian life. I was demobilized the 17th of October, and I'm having a few weeks at home before starting work on the 19th of November. I start working in Birmingham as a cost clerk and hope to settle down quickly and forget everything connected with the war. I don't like leaving Motherwell, but the pay is better in Birmingham and the prospects are better. Send all emails, and he gives a forwarding address. My mother sends best wishes to you and your wife and family. Sincerely, E.W. Murray.
So the date of that letter is?
The date of that letter is the 26th of the 10th, 45.
That's a letter in 1945.
Yes, both of those letters are from 45, after he was released. And I felt it important that those letters should be told because obviously the man is hurting because he wished he'd gone down with the men, which is so often true.
Yeah.
And Mr. Davenport, Waterson, as I said, was a well-known and beloved Salvation Army officer. And when I inquired with headquarters in Toronto, they still had they knew his, as soon as I mentioned his name. Oh yes. He was a much revered man within the Salvation Army, and he worked up here.
So he honored his father's sacrifice.
Yes, and he was obviously very, very
kind.
Affected.
Yeah.
Affected by his son's death that way. And as an old word, but this just gives more the personal side.
Well, it's funny. It's odd when you're listening to when I listen to you read those letters, and it's the content of them could be from any war, from any whatever, and so you're just kind of taking it in. But then when you put it in perspective, that's what somebody was actually writing.
Yes.
Heartfelt from one person to another in those circumstances in 1945.
Exactly.
Like sitting there writing that to someone whose family member went down.
But as a postscript to that, my journey carried on because I got in contact with Sergeant Hill's family.
Yes.
In the UK.
And Sergeant Hill
the rear gunner.
Yeah.
I got in contact with him and had letters backwards and forwards to him. He was the son.
Nice.
Mr. Davenport, the pilot,
Yeah.
a relative of his lives in Halliburton.
Really?
And I've had contacts with him, and I got a lot more information from him. I got the German police report.
So that would be the extended family of the museum.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
Whether you all over Ontario,
Yes.
all over the world.
Yeah. And then Marshall, his wife, they didn't have any children. They were just married, and she remarried in the UK.
Yeah.
Mrs. Marshall, and she went to Australia. She had a daughter. Now I have been in communication. I still communicate with the daughter in Australia.
That's sweet.
I really forget her married name, but she passed away 2 years ago, and I was able to communicate to her via her daughter, and I gave her a lot of information which I have here, which she didn't have,
Right.
and she was most grateful to know this, as was the daughter. She said, he wasn't my father. She says, but he was my mother's first husband, so I feel a closeness.
Yeah.
So my connection went, excuse me, my connection went all over the world, tracing family members.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, the real important message in that, I mean, it's nice to have a building full of old relics that everybody can come and have a look at, but the connection to the extended family around the world that has now like an 80-year history.
Yes.
Since 1945 and before, some First World War, some Korean, some, like the connection to all these people around the world, it's invaluable.
Yes.
To understand, I guess, the need to, in the words of the founder of this museum, it is not about glorifying war. It's about the sacrifice and the compassion and the circumstances and the families of and the human aspects of war and the after effects.
Yes.
Okay, so
as you and I spoke earlier, there's a humanitarian side on both enemies to each other at times.
Yeah, almost had me in tears. I was sitting, you were telling me about communications that ended up satisfying a long need that someone had to know something about a family member, and the lengths that people have gone to accommodate one another, and it's
was such as Erwin Waterson, the gentleman that got out of the plane.
Yeah.
It was always surmised that he did not get out of the plane, that he was blown up.
Yeah.
But
that would be the pilot that got onto the door but never got out.
Yes, that's it. He was the bomb aimer. Yeah. Now, through my contact with other members of the crew, Mr. Davenport's family in Halliburton, they'd done a lot of research.
Right.
And he had a copy of the accident report, which included a copy of the German police report in Germany.
That's pretty astounding.
So in that police report, they said that there was one survivor. They found the wreckage of the plane. Forgive me, but one body was incinerated whole.
Yeah.
The rest were body parts.
Yeah.
But there was one person, his parachute did bring him down, and he was on the roof of a barn or a farmhouse close to where the plane crashed, and he had head trauma. So obviously he got out.
And hit his head.
And the explosion, something hit his head. As the other gentleman said, he got out, and debris went past him.
That would be like...
So Erwin got out, and we found out after. His father obviously may not have known this.
Yeah.
We got it from later communication from ourselves. He did get out in one piece.
Yeah.
But the explosion killed him because he had head trauma.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I mean...
It's kind of like a detective, you know?
Yeah,
you put pieces of the story together.
It's a mystery for sure, and finding the answer at the end of the mysteries.
It's satisfying in a way because as the nephew, we told him that your uncle did get out of the plane.
Well, yeah.
And he landed whole. And his nephew was much appreciative of that, you know?
Sure. You know, we all have our ways, whatever ways that we do our service work. You know, to our community, to whoever, whatever. And in this case, with the museum, the satisfaction that would come out of providing some information to a family member
Yes.
who, for decades, has never known for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's the reward. That's
Yes.
makes it all worth it.
I've just gone through another whole story yesterday, which
Holy
is
jeez, we don't have
which is
time.
another story for you.
We'll do that another day, Sid. Like
So all on Typhoon fighter bombers.
well, that'll be interesting. I'm here for 3 more weeks, so we'll get another couple of
You
stories
get a
in,
couple of stories in, yes.
and I'll get them back to you before I get away and
Yes.
stuff. Oh, yeah. So this has been an amazing story. They're all amazing, and I'll try to piece it together and we'll sort it out
Yes.
down the road. But I want to say thank you so much once again for the opportunity to serve.
And I thank you for their opportunity to keep these stories alive and get them out to people.
Perfect. So I'm going to come around there and say goodnight and goodbye and hello, and I'll make sure I don't step on any of your documents.
Yes, I dropped them all.
Quite all right.
Thanks, Tim.
So, once again, as always, thanks again, Sid, so much. This is Tim Damberg, Georgina Speaks, and I just want to say for everybody out there, take care and have a good day.
And thank you.
Okay, Sid. See you later, guys.